we are here this afternoon for a broad discussion about sustainable Europe, revolutionizing the European market. Some of you may be wondering which market. We may come to that presently. But I think it's a broad, all-encompassing discussion about products, goods, services. We're going to touch on access to technology, capacity building, financing, business model innovation, and hopefully cover many of the bases that you would find most interesting when you're thinking about the potential of bio-based systems and sectors to really drive lasting change within Europe's economies and societies. So revolution, it's a big word. My background is not in bio-based and life sciences, it's actually in French literature. So I thought to get us going, I would reflect on something I remember from university, from Alexis de Tocqueville, who said, in a revolution, as in a novel, the most difficult part to invent is the end. Now, in today's discussion, we're not going to define the end. We're on a journey when it comes to bio-based innovation. And so through our discussions, I hope that we'll be able to tease out some of the insights about where we are today and some of the pathways forward. And so to support those discussions, I'm delighted to welcome a very eminent and eclectic panel of 5 speakers who I'll now invite to join me on stage, if you would be so kind. First, we have Maria Spyraki, member of the European Parliament and of the ITRE Committee and the ENVI Committee, and who also received Parliament Magazine's award for Best MEP in Industry, Research and Innovation last year, or this year, I should say. Next to her, we have Patrik, who is the head of Directorate B at EASME, the executive agency for SMEs in the European Commission, who oversees, amongst other things, the LIFE programme and Horizon 2020 Environment, Energy and Resources. Next to him, Joanna Dupont-Inglis, who I'm sure many of you know as the Secretary General of EuropaBio. Next to her, we have Jean-Gabriel Levon, who's the Vice President of Ynsect. We'll hear a lot more about what you're doing in the next few minutes. And finally, Finan, who is the Vice President for the European Council on Young Farmers. So welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us. I will actually come to the far end, having previously thought I'd be at the other end. So, just a quick word on the format. So we're going to invite each of the panelists to share 4 or 5 minutes of opening remarks within the broader context of taking stock, where we are today, what's been accomplished already in the promotion of bio-based innovation, and whether through the lens of the JU or more broadly, and some thoughts on what comes next, what some of the priorities are. So after we've had opening remarks, we'll move to a broader discussion of some cross-cutting issues, such as the ones I mentioned earlier, and then we'll turn the floor over to you for some questions, challenges, provocative statements, or anything that you'd like to share with our panelists. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Maria Spyraki. And Maria, perhaps you can give us some first thoughts, and you also have the handheld microphone, I think, next to you, which will help for the recording and for everybody to hear you. And just give us a sense of where you think we are today.
Well, I will not use...
No, I think we'll remain seated, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to start with some thoughts concerning bioeconomy and the so-called Green Deal that we are expecting for. Bioeconomy and, in extension, bio-based industries is a quite new sector for the European Union. In fact, you know all that the first bioeconomy strategy has launched and adopted only in 2012 by the European Commission. Since then, and especially the last 2 years, several steps have been taken, especially since the acceleration of circular economy and the Paris Agreement with the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals. The bioeconomy, according to my opinion, is not just another material sector. It has special features. The bioeconomy is about the biologization, it is a Greek word, of industrial value creation. According to my opinion, it provides renewable carbon to the industry, and it can directly replace fossil carbon in almost all applications, in contrast to minerals and metals. At EU level, as you know, there are differences between countries, member states, and regions. I would like just to mention the Finnish government and Finland aspiring country and member state of the bioeconomy. And I would like to say that bioeconomy is extremely important for this. In Greece, my home country, bioeconomy is interlinked with circular economy. And at the regional level, we have two regions, Western Macedonia and Central Macedonia, which participated several EU projects, especially in Horizon project and Interreg. Currently, at the EU level, we are in transitional phase with the new Commission and the much awaiting Green Deal to have a new proposal. We will also have a new proposal on taxonomy finance, and I will explain what do I mean with taxonomy finance. Maybe you are not very familiar with this term. It is also very important to note that only a few days ago, the Commission, the European Commission and the European Investment Bank announces the completion of a public procurement process for the selection of an investment advisor to set up and manage the European Circular Bioeconomy Fund. I think it is one of the most important and crucial developments in this framework. The fund aims to provide financing for innovative circular bioeconomy companies and projects in the EU and in countries associated with the Horizon 2020 program. The new fund will provide access to finance to the SMEs in forms of equity, debt or cash equity, to innovate circular bioeconomy companies and projects with various sizes. The new fund, which will be called European Circular Bioeconomy Fund, let's tell it ECBF, will also raise funds from public and private investors with a target fund volume of 250 million, aims for a first close in the first semester, in the first Q of 2020. Please note that we are waiting also for the taxonomy legislation, and it will be a list of sustainable funds, of sustainable investments. And it will be a list that it will finally finally set up the eligibility criteria of finance in order to have sustainable finance. And it will be extremely important. I would like just to mention at this period that the Commission Article 6 proposed regulation on a framework for sustainable investments says that it will be very important to switch to use of renewable materials. And I would like to take it into account. We have to pay also great attention to the new financial instruments that we can provide, you InvestEU, the existing structural and investments fund. I would like to close with this. It is important to focus on bio-based industry in the framework of circular economy. That's why I think that it is important to include the new policy of bio-based industry in the new proposal of circularity too. It is important to start discussing on it, and it is important to say that when the Commission provides the proposal, it will be maybe by the first semester of 2020, bio-based industry must be there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. Yeah, I mean, I think in the broader context of the EIB and its future lending programs, it's really important that we're seeing the circular bioeconomy being integrated into the lending instruments. I don't know whether other members of the panel have any comments that they want to offer on what Maria shared with us regarding the new financing landscape. We'll come back to it certainly later, but would anybody like to add any comments for now? No? Yes, Patrik. Well, we're coming to you anyway, so we'll use this as a segue into your remarks as well.
Well, thank you, Simon. Just a quick comment, of course, Horizon 2020, but also Horizon Europe have already been mentioned, and bigger expectations that are coming, not only with the new Commission, but also with the new, let's say, financing period 2021-2028. There is something that I would just like to say. It's not only about the scaling of funding. We see that, of course, even for research and innovation, we have more and more funding from program to program, but it's also how we use these funds. So the efficiency of funding and how we manage and leverage, let's say, public funding with private investments. I think that's also the key.
So would you like to build on that and tell us a little bit more about what EASME is planning for the future around biobased? Because I think it's obviously been a strong part of some of the investments that you've been making in recent years and the programs you've been supporting.
Yeah, sure. First of all, just let's say, introductory comment that I'm familiar with the BBI. I used to work in the Commission directorate that was called at that time Bioeconomy in DG Research and Innovation. So I was there. I was not working directly with BBI, but I saw how BBI was set up and how it started and kicked off. Now, some introductory words about my agency. EASME, Executive Agency for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, is one of the 6 executive agencies of the Commission. And we are about 500 people, and we manage about 11 billion euros of funding in current programming period through different programs. The biggest chunk is the Horizon 2020, but then there is also LIFE program, European Maritime and Fishery Fund, and also the program that we called COSME, Competitiveness for SMEs. So this is quite a diverse portfolio of programs with different rules and different goals, but I would say, at least for my department, that everything is about sustainability, circularity, circular economy, and everything what we do goes towards implementation of a number of sustainable development goals. Also, as it is also in the title of our agency, SMEs are the core, not only of the economy, but also of the activities that we are supporting. Now, to be more concrete, I would just like to mention a few examples. As a part of the Horizon 2020, we introduced a novelty, which is not such a novelty anymore, but still, the so-called SME instrument. So this is a specific instrument that targets innovative SMEs and brings them from the business idea to develop the innovative solution and then bring that solution to the market. And looking at what we have funded in this program, which is now continuing into something that I think you will hear a lot in the future about, that is the European Innovation Council, which we are piloting in the 2020 course. Looking at your particular sector, I've seen that we have funded through this instrument around 370 projects so far, out of which I think 35 come from the biomass and biofuel sector. About what is the funding that we are talking about. The projects are typically between 0.5 and 2.5 million euros, and they can attract an additional 15 million euros through equity funding. So it is not a negligible amount also on the European scale. Our role is not only to be a funding agency and implementing body, but we also provide other services. For example, we support the European Enterprise Network, which has been put in place to assist and coach enterprises, in particular SMEs, also in this area to expand and grow and to expand their businesses. I think we have a good example of a Polish organic farmer, which I think the company is called Agromat, and they started to use the European Enterprise Network services back in 2008, and through 10 years of work, the last 10 years, they have expanded their business and they increased their profit for 500%. And not only that, they are now also going into other business sectors. So not only organic farming, but for example, also into tourism. So these are all our activities, which I think are quite exciting. And of course, there are many more. We work closely with the Commission. We give them feedback on what our projects are delivering, which is very important for the policy making in the future. Now, of course, we are preparing how we will deal with the Horizon Europe. And also, as the new Commission has just been put in place, a lot of thinking is also going into the direction, how do we implement the Green Deals through the next generation of programs?
Well, I think we're all eagerly awaiting more details when it comes to the Green Deal. We were just talking with Maria before we took the stage about, it's very difficult to actually understand which direction organizations need to be taking at the moment. But of course, I think in the next 6 months, as we go through the legislative processes around Horizon, once there's more clarity around future partnerships as well and joint undertakings, we'll know more about where the resources might be placed. But I think that's actually a great moment to segue to Joanna, who's been leading really one of the most significant platforms on bio-based innovation, technology, and business development. I mean, Joanna, are you positive at the moment, or are you a little cautious until you know more information about what's coming next in the new commission?
No, I think I'm super positive at the moment. And I mean, when I look outside at the exhibition there, all of the projects, the team that's working there at BBI and BIC, everybody in this room who's contributing to initiatives in resource efficiency and circularity and bioeconomy, it's just phenomenal. I mean, it really, I've maybe took a little step back from the bioeconomy recently to focus on a couple of other things, but when I come back in, and it might not look like it to the people in this room because you're so involved in it and you're so up close to it, perhaps what you see is the frustrations and the challenges more than what you've actually achieved. But the progress is insane. I mean, and it's so essential as well. And I also feel really positive about it because I know that we're all, as individual sectors, constantly striving to be more resource efficient, to be more sustainable, and to be more circular. It's what society demands. It's what we want to deliver through the work that we do day to day anyway. And the BBI provides an amazing facility to catalyze that. I think if I think back to our experience at EuropaBio and how it began with the BBI, we are an association for biotechnology in Europe, so we consider ourselves to be an enabler of the bioeconomy. And our discussions around the need for a public-private partnership originated because a lot of our members are chemicals producers, and they wanted to become more bio-based chemical producers. They wanted to be able to also find ways to increase nutritional levels of different products and to reduce their footprint on production of things. So one of the problems was that there wasn't enough funding, and it required quite a high risk investment to do the bigger TRL level work and to get to commercialization. So we started talking to the then commission, which was a Gagan-Quinn commission, about the need for a public-private partnership. And we were very quickly joined by other people in this room who I can see around here. So we worked very closely together with CEJA, but also with CEFI, with the technology platforms, with a number of different associations, with Starch Europe, with many others, to put together the idea for the Bio-Based Industries Joint Undertaking. And we were so thrilled that it took off. But what we found afterwards, when this successful bio-based industry joint undertaking is up and running with all this potential, was that we had created in the process a real need to interact with each other and to talk to each other about what was going on, where the challenges were for the different sectors, what needed to happen, what kinds of research and innovation were needed for the future. So we maintained this through the formation of the European Bioeconomy Alliance, again, many of whose members are in this room, and that's still going strong, contributing a lot of policy recommendations into the discussions around Green Deal and around circularity and many other programs that we're looking at now in the future mandate of the Commission and Parliament. And then we look at the impact that it's had on the blossoming of bioeconomy strategies in regions and member states around across Europe, and the sharing of best practice that's been enabled by the creation of the BBI, which is also incredible. And things like the the Bioeconomy Stakeholders Panel. I see my vice chair here, Ortwin, and many other members of the stakeholders panel, which enabled us to look at what kind of guiding principles we wanted for the future development of the bioeconomy and what kind of actions we could recommend to the member states in the regions. And that brought together NGOs with technology platforms and industry and regions, a really diverse group of people who somehow managed to agree on a common course of action. So there's really been so much achieved, and I feel extremely positive about the potential for the future as well.
Well, I presume this is a sentiment that everybody shares on the panel. Is anybody in any way skeptical about what comes next? Good, okay, well, that's always very encouraging to hear. Okay, Joan, oh yes, Maria.
I think that I fully agree with your approach, but I would like just to say that it is time to understand and maybe to facilitate and to encourage to change the consumer model. I think this is the base on we can build. If we finally have consumers that they are fully interested on sustainable products, then bio-based industries will have a very bright future.
Okay, thank you for that, Maria. We'll certainly come back to the consumer question a little later. Now, okay, we're going to move on to Sean. Now, one of the broader questions around how we take forward the bio-based approach or methodology, or how we encourage greater participation and diversification in sectors, is the involvement of primary producers. Now, you're a farmer. And I guess for you and your association, it raises a number of questions about how you can mobilize en masse around bio-based innovation to look at new revenue streams, new business opportunities, and a fresh way of looking at farming and primary production as a contribution to this shift to more sustainable systems. So perhaps share a few thoughts on where you are today.
I will indeed, and thanks very much to Cleopatra and the organisers for the invitation here this afternoon. As Simon said, I'm a farmer from the west of Ireland. My farming is a beef and sheep production enterprise, but I call myself a grass farmer because my production system is based on a grass-based system, which is producing or turning an inedible protein, which is the grass, into an edible protein in the form of meat. So I'm very aware as a farmer of the environment and the surrounding biodiversity with which I work as a farmer. I'm also very conscious of the potential which the bioeconomy presents for the farming community and sector, and the primary indigenous sector right across Europe. We as farmers have an abundance of biomasses, including waste biomasses on our farms, and we're constantly looking at ways of diversifying and adding value to the products that we produce, and also looking at alternative production within our farm gate and within our farming model. So this diversification offers an opportunity, a huge opportunity, I would say. And if anything, over the course of today's discussions, I haven't heard anything or even a mention of the primary producer, or indeed the forester, or the person who, or the enterprise which can provide the raw material for a successful bio-based industry. My second hat that I wear is, and the reason I'm here today is that I'm a representative of young farmers. I was the president of the Irish Young Farmers Association, Macra na Ferma, and I'm now a vice president of the European Young Farmers Organization, which is CEJA. At CEJA, we have members from right across the European Union, where we represent and advocate at European level for supports, for recognition, and to raise the awareness of young farmer issues and the challenges we face at a farm level. I also do some work for the Irish Bioenergy Association, and I'm actively involved in some bioenergy projects around biogas, biomass, biofuels, energy crops, and wood fuels, which is all part of the bioeconomy. Farming at the moment, as we know it, is at a crossroads. At a European level, we're waiting on the next reform of the Common Agricultural Policy. There are many challenges facing the sector as we move forward. Those challenges vary from the environment and climate change to shifting consumer trends and nutrition, to income and viability at a farm level, and also the drive towards decarbonisation of our overall economy and how we can assist at an agricultural level in terms of improving the sustainability of the whole European Union. So we're looking at opportunities. We have to look at opportunities from an agricultural and farming perspective, and I think that the opportunity that presents itself very strongly to us is this whole bio-based and bioeconomy area. Resource efficiency is something which we're very aware of at a farm level, and circular economy is something which we're becoming more aware of at a farm level, and they are two very important aspects of the bioeconomy. The farmers of the past, and my father's generation of farmers, were producers of food, fibre and fuel. But European policy has brought us down a direction where we've lost the fibre and the fuel element, and we've focused solely, in most cases, on the food aspect. And that has been through the Common Agricultural Policy, and that's the way policy has driven the whole sector. But we need probably to recalibrate and reassess where we're going, and maybe move back more towards the fibre and the fuel as well as the food, and have a three-pronged approach in terms of improving the viability of our farms. But what is required to drive that change? There are a number of things in my view, and I know the questions will delve more into those, but just at a very high level, I think the first one would be education, knowledge transfer are very, very important. And that's education and knowledge transfer around what the bioeconomy is from a primary producer's perspective, but also what that is from a consumer's perspective. I think rural infrastructure will be a considerable challenge as we move forward to roll out and to grow and improve and significantly develop the bioeconomy, and it's something which we need to be aware of, that investment will be required in order to build the systems and the supply chains that are required so that everyone gets a fair return along that supply chain. Because the reality is, unless farmers get a return for their raw materials, then it's hard to see a successful outcome from the bioeconomy perspective, from a farming perspective. And the final point I would like to make is that we have an abundance of raw materials, and we have abundance of materials which we can produce: hemp, biochar, biofuels, biogas, wood-based materials, forestry residues. The list is endless. One of our speakers this morning said that every fossil fuel-based material today can be made from a tree tomorrow. And I would say it can be made from a tree, but it can be made from a bio-based material. So I think that just sums up the opportunity which exists here. And young farmers are keen to ensure that their livelihoods are sustainable, and I believe really want to be part of this sector, the bioeconomy, bio-based industry sector as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, Sean, thank you very much for that. Would anyone on the panel like to respond or add to what Sean just framed from a primary producer's perspective? Then we'll move immediately on to our last panelist, Jean-Gabriel, award-winning enterprise, Ynsect. I think EuropaBio tends to give you quite a few prizes for the work you're doing. So, I mean, you're at the cutting edge of commercializing some of these new technologies, right? I mean, I think really an exemplar of what the future may hold. So perhaps you can give us a few thoughts on what you see as some of the priorities or the enabling aspects that would enable companies like yours to scale and grow, and then we'll use that as a bridge into a broader conversation around consumer perceptions and the new markets.
Yes, thank you. We're very proud as a team to be recognized on that. So it's really something important. It helps a lot to get visibility on the subject. So I'm myself also a farmer, not with grass, but with wheat bran, and we make beetles out of it. So it's this little guy here. You can go and see us. It's the farming booth in this side of the room. The point I would like to make is that I think that bio-based today is already won. I mean, it's just a matter of time that everybody will switch on the bio-based side of the world. So I don't think that we need to put much effort on that. What I like in what you remembered for this morning is the fact that we can get fossil-free of a lot of things. And I think that more than bio-based industry, I think the next 10 years will be more about fossil-free industries. So let's talk numbers. We had the amazing work of the GIEC done in 2015. Industry, 30% of the carbon emission. Agro, something 30 other %. So we are responsible together of more than 2/3 of the carbon emission today. So this is our real challenge. For example, in our system, we use gas to create steam that will dry our final protein product? How can we get out of this? How can we not use gas? There are a lot of questions like that are not only about the product, but the real process behind. How can we decarbonize that? It's I think, the next phase. The first 10 years were amazing in terms of funding, in terms of everything, to put in place the bio-based industry. I really think that the next step is, okay, fossil-free. It's 2020. We are 30 years to cut by 3 the emission. How do we do that? That's I think, the core thing, but not only for bio-based industry, but for everyone. That's I think where the consumer will wait for us. I think that, for example, next year in Ynsect, we will have our accountability both in euro and in CO2 live. Like every manager in the company will get his budget in euro and in CO2. When do we all do that? When do we set up a price for carbon emission for everyone? Okay, the normal price is plus infinite, but can we agree on, I don't know, 40 euro per ton, 50, 60? Next year for us it will be 40 euros per ton, and we will use it to, not to buy trees and say, yeah, we compensate. That's a modern form of indulgences for me, you know, you buy out your paradise. No, real projects that actually cut off the carbon emission in our technology today, because even us that are very young in terms of process, we can do better. As I said, we can cut off gas into the steam to dry our product. That's something that we're working on next year, thanks to this kind of idea. I think it's really that the consumer will wait in the years to come.
So that, I think, raises a very interesting question, which I think opens up for the discussion with the panel. I mean, we're seeing perhaps an unparalleled or an unprecedented level of policy ambition, right? Sort of creating some of the top-down conditions, which I think will include discussions around a climate tax, the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan, the EIB looking to unlock 1 trillion in climate transition financing and so forth. But for us to have a market revolution, can it just come from the top down? I mean, is the consumer base in Europe, whether that's B2B or B2C, really ready to embrace bio-based solutions and services and products at scale? Or do we really need to rely on policy to be the main driver and, as you say, wait for consumer attitudes and awareness to catch up? I mean, I'm very interested to get your thoughts on where the balance between those two is at the moment, and if there's a real imbalance between the policy leadership and consumer awareness and receptiveness for these new products and services. What can be done to make that more equal? So who would like to start? Maybe Maria, you'd like to kick us off.
Yes, and your question is very interesting, and in the framework that I have already touched concerning the consumer awareness and the consumer model. Well, I would like to say that we will have a very, very ambitious legislation concerning Green Deal. And it is important to know that it's not just a piece of legislation. It is in reality the evolution of our generation. And we have the responsibility to implement it in all parliaments. I mean, we have to implement it with a fair and just transition. We have to implement it by investing efficient in innovative ideas. We have to implement it by reducing as soon as possible greenhouse emission. And at the same time, we have to implement it by taking people on board. And I would like to focus on this. It is important to have two parallel roads. First, it will be, of course, the legislation, and it will take place during 2020. But at the same period of time, we have to have campaigns in our member states, and we have to have small campaigns in the regions in order to explain to the people that it is just an instrument in order to create jobs and growth, and at the same time in order to upgrade their own level of everyday life. I think it is extremely important to explain to the people that it's not something that it happens in Brussels. It's something that it will affect their own life. And if we finally have on board farmers coming from France or farmers coming from Greece, and at the same time we have on board researchers coming from Germany and researchers coming from Austria, and at the same time we have on board people that they are living in energy poverty, and we will facilitate them to upgrade their own life because we will upgrade the energy efficiency of the building, then it will work, otherwise not.
So just to build on this, and this is an open question for the rest of the panel, the European policy leadership is there for everyone to see, but what about member states and regions and municipalities? Do you have the sense that they're on board as well? Are they ready to support this high-level strategic ambition at European Union level to really drive this down to grassroots level and try and bring citizens and consumers on this bio-based transition?
I guess it's quite just a personal perception or anecdotal, but in terms of the work that I've personally done with member state actors through the stakeholders panel, the previous panel there, through the work that we generally do with the European Bioeconomy Alliance, it really seems to me that it's really a push-pull. So the member state officials are extremely aware of the need to make sure that consumers have more sustainable choices. And the consumers are putting the pressure on to make sure that they have the option of them as well. So, I mean, a lot of the work that we've done at EuropaBio, particularly in this area, is kind of exemplified with our annual conference, which is called the European Forum on Industrial Biotech. And when we started that 10 or 12 years ago, a lot of it was about scaling up. And we were trying to feature scale up all the time and show where the new scale ups were happening, showing that we were getting closer to market, closer to the consumer. And that's still the case, but it also increasingly became about working with brands. So every year we try to get more brands to come to the conference to talk about what challenges they were facing. And we've had companies like Unilever, Ikava, IKEA, Tetra Pak, Lego, Carlsberg, Jaguar Land Rover, L'Oreal, the list goes on and on of companies who understand that there's a consumer demand but are facing challenges in getting the products to consumers. I know when we were talking about this some years ago, it depends obviously what products you're looking at, but if you ask consumers in certain product sectors what do they value most, they would go first for price, then they would go for performance, or maybe the other way around, and then they would go for sustainability last. And I think that's kind of changing. So there's so many moving parts to this, but I think the most important thing is that we break down barriers for industries to be able to get these new products and processes to consumers, to provide the platform so they can see them. And in the past, and this is also a personal opinion, but in the past, I have felt slightly frustrated that, as you said at the beginning, Simon, we're on a journey here, and the first product that we produce of a particular type that's bio-based is not necessarily going to be more sustainable than, let's say, a fossil equivalent, because it's been optimized over a century. So we're all working towards improving sustainability, but we can't allow ourselves to be paralyzed by the quest for perfection. So I think there has to be a little bit of give and take there, and a little bit of acknowledgement of the fact that, this is an evolution, or it's a kind of a marathon that we have to sprint. Is one of the things that we've kind of, the analogies that we've had in the past. And there's always room for improvement, but improvements are constantly being sought and being made and being demanded by the consumer.
Fantastic, thank you, Joanna. Now, Sean, you want to add
I'd just
something?
like to come in there. In terms of the level of knowledge at a member state level, or communication at a member state level, I think it varies depending on what stakeholders within the sector you're talking about. In Ireland, we have very good, I suppose, organisations and systems being set up around the bioeconomy in terms of Bioeconomy Foundation, Centre, Campus, all of that. Whereas then when you speak at a primary producer level, at a farmer level, there's little knowledge and understanding of the potential which this sector presents from a primary producer's perspective. Like, everyone is aware of the challenges we face from a climate action and climate change perspective, but we don't readily talk about the solutions, and this is a solution, and it's something which has varying levels of awareness. I would say as well, at a political level, the level of awareness of the potential which exists, and in terms of the work which has been done, when you look around the projects which are here, there would be quite a lack of knowledge and awareness amongst our political establishment in terms of the benefits that this growth of this sector could bring in solving a multitude of problems and providing a multitude of alternative resources, replacing current fossil-based solutions. But I think the one big point that I would like to make here, that in moving towards, and the point was very well made by the previous speaker, in moving towards a bio-based economy and bio-based industries, there will be cost. And I think we have to see budgets at a national exchequer level being set aside to cover the cost of the development of some of that infrastructure which is required in order to make this a meaningful, broad and industry which will assist us moving towards the transition which we're embarking upon at the moment.
Okay, no, thank you. I think that's a great point. And I think we'll stay on the resourcing question for now. Perhaps less on infrastructure right now, but obviously anybody who wants to share thoughts on that are welcome. But I think perhaps for Patrik and initially Jean-Gabriel, if we're going to see a scaled transition towards new business models, more advanced and more accelerated adoption of these new technologies and solutions, then entrepreneurs, innovators like yourself, Jean-Gabriel, are going to need tools. They're going to need knowledge. They're going to need access to technologies. Do you think it's there at the moment? Or do we need to do more to enable the next generation, and including primary producers like yourself, Sean? Do you have the access to the resources you need to actually start embarking on this transition towards more sustainable business models and enterprise? And also, what can the European Commission and its agencies do to promote that? Sure.
I think the short answer is yes. We even have too much. If you have an entrepreneurial spirit today, you can start whatever business at a speed that is unprecedented. I mean, look at Ynsect. In 2010, we didn't exist. Today, we are 120, and we are working on building a multi-100 million capex plant in the north of France before 2020. Mm-hmm. So this kind of speed is something that only the 21st century can bring. So I really don't think that we lack of resources, and all that has been put in place, that will be put in place, that is put in place at the moment. I think it's I won't say it's enough, of course, but no, it's enough to work. What might be needed is actually, what are we aiming for? I think we can't be today aiming for profit. That's something of the past, and we need to be aiming to what I would call robustness, like coherence. We don't need to set a priority between consumers and policy at European level. We need to do both, but we need to be coherent. We need to be more resilient. Actually, what can we do at our level to do something? Can we source all what we eat today from local stuff in Brussels? And not bring things, I've seen some, that came from several hundred kilometers away. It's small stuff, but that are coherent. And I really think it's that we need to go, that we need to implement. Profit is essential for economy, but today it's not the economy that at stake, it's biodiversity, it's our environment, it's our own way of life. And it can't be that only anymore. And I think we all agree with that, and we kind of need new tools to measure what we do with something else than just euro. That's what we try next year with this CO2-based accountability. But just for, I take this example, it's quite interesting. I thought that our CO2 footprint was based on transportation and on the feed intake that we gave to our beetles. Okay, we transport with bran, we retransport. I thought that was that, and energy. No, 70% of our footprint is made when we build the plant. 70%. So, and actually, I was aware of that just because I started to measure everything. And this kind of insight was not made because it will improve my profit, but was made because it will improve my robustness and my overall coherence actually on the project. And yeah, I would say it's that thread that we should be following.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you make the construction link, because a year or so ago I was introduced to the founders of a spin-out from Imperial College London who are making insulation materials for the construction industry out of chicken feathers, which is remarkably efficient and also environmentally sustainable. But thank you very much for that, Jean-Gabriel. Patrik, anything that you'd like to add on this? Because there's also the question about pan-European perspectives. I mean, I think perhaps there's greater access to capital and know-how and so forth in Ireland or France or Western Northern Europe, but other parts of Europe perhaps less so. So where do you see the capacity building and the tools question in EASME?
Well, first, I would like to continue with the example of plant and buildings, because energy efficiency is a part of the portfolio in my department, where the colleagues are always saying that the one of the biggest challenges is to make our old buildings more efficient, and that if we do that, we will make a great impact on decarbonization, although it's something that it doesn't come first at your mind. On a more, let's say, broader scale, the things that we have just discussed, I think, from our point of view, research and innovation, certainly we should not only keep developing the, let's say, technological innovation, but we have to go broader. Understanding the consumers and supporting them was already mentioned. And I think we have to go, and we are already going also in the area that is called non-technological or social innovation. There I think we have to do more than we have done so far.
So that's actually a very good segue into sort of the next general question, which comes back to Horizon Europe. Obviously there's a lot going on, a lot being planned in the pipeline around different financial instruments for enterprise development and so forth. But we also have Horizon Europe, which will be the largest framework program ever. And within the natural and food systems pillar in Horizon Europe, there's going to be an indicative 1 billion allocated to bio-based innovation systems. So from your perspective, where should that money be spent? What do you think are the most urgent priorities in terms of research and innovation that Europe can take the lead on through Horizon Europe and hopefully get that amplified?
Obviously, beetles. Beetles, obviously.
Well, okay, but you have a vested interest. But, okay, alternative sources of protein are potentially one. You've talked about fuel and fiber, Sean. I mean, what else do you think this major investment should go towards in terms of the new technologies that can potentially start to revolutionize different parts of the European industrial sector landscape? Non-technological and technological.
Well, I guess when we're looking at what we want to deliver by 2030, which will almost be or will just be just after the end of the next phase of the framework program, we've all got SDGs at the forefront of our mind, and delivering on the climate ambition and climate mitigation goals has got to be right up there at the top of the list, but also things like sustainable consumption and production, where bio-based can do an awful lot, zero hunger and the objectives that we have to improve nutrition that is a major health-related aspect for the future as well. So I think all of those objectives and those that play into the goals that have been identified under the Green Deal, should be at the forefront of what we're doing. And I guess we're all kind of aware of the urgency of the future that we face, and all of our efforts should really be channeled in those directions. I think personally the topics identified for the missions are very appropriate in terms of tackling cancer, but also soil health, healthy oceans. The farm to fork strategy is also a really important way that we can use innovation to deliver on those.
Any further thoughts on the research and innovation priorities?
Yeah, so something that we put a lot of thinking, and I think that would benefit everyone, is on traditional technologies, technologies that are actually carbon-free. It's really difficult today to find good alternatives actually on that, and I mean the process to process proteins, whatever they are always more or less the same, and it's always difficult to find technology that are actually okay with, for example, SDG objectives. And I think it's not related to any type of bioproduction. It's just, I was talking about steam. Everyone needs steam. How do we produce a steam carbon-free? Those are R&D questions that could be tackled.
Yeah, Sean, please, next, and then back to Patrik.
I think I agree with everything that has been said by the previous speakers, but from an agricultural perspective, I think we need to do some work in terms of calculating the environmental and sustainable benefits of changing practices around production of bio-based materials instead of more conventional food production systems. So there's probably need, and I speak predominantly around, you know, there's a lot of carbon sinks in the agricultural sector, but we don't maybe have the research and development work to back up from a scientific perspective the value of those sinks and how that value can be significantly increased through production of bio-based materials instead of maybe some of our conventional production systems, which would be predominantly based around meat and dairy production, particularly in the Irish scenario. So that's an important area and something which I think needs significant focus. We speak about gross emissions from an agricultural perspective. We should be looking at net emissions in terms of how we can actually put a value on what farmers are doing as primary producers, and the biodiversity work that they're doing, and also the work from an overall economic, environmental and social sustainability perspective. The other area which, and it kind of ties back to a previous point, I think a huge amount of work and funding needs to go into the communication systems that we need to develop in order to bring all of our society, and I mean from all levels of society, along a journey around what every individual can do from the perspective of climate action, but also from the perspective of the bioeconomy, so that they're aware and have that knowledge to make informed decisions, and also have the knowledge to actually rely on fact and scientific based information, and the sources that they use in order to get that information, because there's quite a multitude of material out there which sometimes, you know, it varies in its in terms of its scientific and technical background. So that's another area which I think should be a significant focus. How do we develop and adopt communication systems to inform all aspects of society about all of this area from a bio-based perspective?
That's a huge challenge, but I think the importance of narrative is something that anybody who's working in this field or anything related to sustainability struggles with. Right? It's very easy to send the headline messages, which often come with a negative impact due to the potential consequences of inaction, but creating compelling stories about why we should be rethinking our way of life is something very systemic but quite different. Now, I think, Patrik, he wants to add something to this.
Yeah, I think the other panelists have given a lot of very concrete examples how the research and innovation agenda should look like in the years to come. So I will not elaborate further on that because I think they are also bigger experts in the area than myself. I would just like to say that, of course, there are big expectations from Horizon Europe, and rightly so. And I think the Commission has invested a lot of time and energy to make the priorities right and to make the program fit for purpose. Also with broadly consulting many stakeholders, public at large. We had also this, I think, quite successful event, Research and Innovation Days in September here in Brussels. But what I would like to say is important that we do not prescribe everything in advance. Even these missions that we have now identified, the 5 of them, they will be in place for the first half of the Horizon Europe. And then there maybe will be a chance for different missions for the second half. Also, the things that are not included specifically in missions are not forgotten. We also have a big part of the program which is completely bottom-up. And here I come again to the EIC. So I think we are trying to tackle these complex challenges really from all possible angles. But of course, Horizon Europe, no matter 100 billion or even more or less, what is important is also how we mobilize other funding opportunities and how we mobilize the member states.
Absolutely. Jean-Gabriel.
Yeah, I have a very concrete idea that I'm playing with, actually, with a friend at the French budget. Instead of having a value-added tax, we should have, and I think we will have, a carbon emitted tax. And so that, I mean, we all are sensitive to price. Okay, let's really put pressure on carbon emission. I think we have to get back to very, very, very simple measure, not big plans, but very simple things that are very symbolic, but that set the right pace. Like value added, we don't care. We want to reduce emission. I mean, it's a bit provocative, but I think there is something there.
I can see, Maria, you'd like
Sometimes the most of them taxes are not working. And I think that if we finally decide to have a wider approach on the issue that we are now discussing, I would like to say that we have to take into account the differences between member states and the difference between regions. And allow me to prioritize the way that we have to go ahead with Green Deal and the new challenges that we are facing. First, it is the access to finance. And it's not only Horizon. It will be the new instruments that the EIB will create. One of them will be the so-called Fund for Bio-Based Industry. Of course, you all know that EIB is ready to transform itself into a climate bank, and it will be a huge challenge for investors. Second, is the way that we have access to the information. It's not the same access. It's not easy to have access when you come from an SME in a very small village in Greece than you come from a research center in the center of Germany. And third, of course, is the proper infrastructures. If you are a farmer in the middle of the Czech Republic, you cannot make your farm, you cannot transform your farm into a bio-based. You cannot have a management of your waste into a bio-based fuel because you have not access to the network. So you cannot do it. It will not be easy for you, but if you finally decide to go ahead, you have not the proper infrastructures to provide your product into the network. Allow me to say that I think that it is important to make plans, but it's much more important to implement them. So we have to take into account all these parameters. And I will disagree with the imposing taxes, because we start discussing on taxes on the so-called border adjustment mechanism. What kind of tax it will be? Nobody knows. Because the commissioners designated, the commissioners are now, they are in office. They don't know, they cannot provide us with details. If we add another tax on the discussion, then the people will start thinking about how they will pay the taxes. How they will pay these kind of taxes. They cannot afford it. We have to encourage them, and we have to incentivize them to get on board. Not to take the distance that we already have with Brussels.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to make sure that we give you the chance to either pick up on what's already been said or to raise potential new topics of conversation. So we have a microphone there. Gentleman raised his hand.
I'm David Newman from the BBIA, and it was very interesting to hear you, the Honourable Spyraki, talking about taxes when Greece is one of the countries which, through the last 10 years, has taken 15.4 billion euro of taxpayers' money out of their pocket for subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. And actually, last year, we took 112 billion euro of taxpayers' money across EU 28 countries out of taxpayers' pockets to give to the fossil fuel industry. What are we talking about, ladies and gentlemen, if we don't put a stop to that?
Well, I think that's certainly one way of revolutionizing the European market. I don't know, Maria, is there anything you'd like to say in response to that, or anyone else on the panel?
You know, frankly speaking, I am at the principal level fully against of the use of fossil fuel. But I'm a politician, and I have to have my bond on the ground. Allow me to say that the current government, the new government, has already put a very, very ambitious target concerning our electricity mix. The government decided to shut off all lignite plants by 2028. And we're facing a huge challenge to replace the capacity that the lignite plants are now providing with alternative. And we can start with biofuels, of course, but it is not enough. We can start with renewables, but it is not enough. And we have to use gas as a transition fuel as well. So it is important, first of all, to have something on the ground and to implement it in reality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, any other comments or questions? Yes, we have a lady over here, I think.
Yes,
just
good
introduce
afternoon.
yourself as well.
Yes, thank you. My name is Juliette, and I work for Starch Europe. And we are one of the proud founders of the European Bioeconomy Alliance. We have a booth in the Riverside area, so please come and visit us. But I would like to thank all the panelists for a very interesting debate, throwing interesting ideas, and the proof is that, yes, there's no common agreement. I have a question for the Commission, because you seem pretty much convinced that, yes, the bio-based industries are the way ahead. Today, the Commission's DG FISMA, responsible for financial markets, is putting together a selection of sectors that are deemed sustainable. It's called the taxonomy regulation. Apologies for the jargon, but are you making sure that the bio-based industries will be selected as sustainable industries? Because this will have a tremendous impact on banks, allowing loans for young and young farmers, of course, young industries, startups, and even starch producers that are part of our membership. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, just to be fair, Patrik's from the executive agency, EASME, so I don't think you're in a position to comment on the new policy direction, but any thoughts you have would be welcome.
If the question was, are we sure, I can answer that we will do our best.
Very good. I think that serves the purpose. Okay, so we just have a couple of minutes left. Are there any other questions or comments from the floor, first of all? No, I don't see any more hands. Okay, well, let's make sure that we end on a positive note. I'd like you to look 10 years into the future. I don't know where we'll all be working, but what do you think the bio-based markets of 2030 are going to look like? Will there be a bio-based market, or will it be mainstream? Do you think we've got a realistic chance of achieving some of the goals that are being set, or the impact targets around Horizon Europe, around sustainable transitions to different economic models and resource use? Where do you see the world in 10 years' time? Who'd like to start? Joanna.
I would like to finish on an optimistic note as well. And I mean, I already feel that in terms of the percentage of the sectors that are conventional, for example, if you look at the petrochemical industry that's transferring to bio-based, it's significant enough to say, yeah, we've got a good shot at it, you know, in terms of people would already say, or some people would already say that bio-based is already mainstream. And I think it will, I think there's a huge public appetite and enthusiasm for it. And that's also a really encouraging thing. Generally, I know we have the motivation to do it, but it has to be a collective effort. So it's going to take the consumers, young people, politicians, industry, regulators, and industry really has an important role to play in working towards that. The other thing that I would say about biobased, which I think is pretty outstanding, is that it's one of the sectors that has been forced to work together in unconventional partnerships already, and new and novel partnerships. It's been really tricky because, you know, it's not a natural instinct for, you know, this combination of sectors to come together, and we see other sectors realizing that if they really want to be innovative in the future, they need to work across boundaries and across sectors. Integration of technologies is really the way things are being seen in the future, and I can certainly say I was working a while back for a long time in key enabling technologies, of which biotech is one. Even back then, it was with photonics, advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, a bunch of other industries. Even then, the push was continually on integrating new technologies and new sectors. And I would say the bio-based sectors have the edge there because they've been doing it, they've been living it and experiencing it. And I certainly hope we will be looking at a much more bio-based reality in 10 years' time.
Thank you, Joanna. Okay, well, let's go to Sean next. I'm going to end with Patrik and Maria, so you can hold on to your microphones for now. Sean first, and then Jean-Gabriel.
I'd be optimistic about the farm of the future in 10 years' time being very embracing of the bioeconomy. I think we will certainly have quite a different farming model in 10 years' time to where we are today. We'll have gone through the next reform of the CAP, which will take us to 2027. The new reform will be in place at that stage. I suppose the challenges that we have to address over the next number of years in order for the reality to be, for that vision to come forward in 10 years' time are particularly around how do we satisfy, from a farming perspective, the need for food in terms of a growing population. How do we balance that with the challenges of climate change, and then how do we ensure diversification at a farm level to ensure the economic, environmental and social sustainability of our agricultural system. And I think the bioeconomy fits very well in terms of offering that opportunity from a diversification perspective. And farmers by their nature are open to change and open to opportunity. And I know particularly young farmers are, and the members which I would have regular contact with across many member states and indeed in my own home country are willing to take opportunities. But I think it fundamentally will come back down to that economic sustainable piece around the farmer getting a return for the high value which can be created from some of our bio-based materials, and we supplying raw material. So that's where I would see it.
Terrific, thank you. All right, Jean-Gabriel.
I think that in 10 years' time, humanity as a whole will have switched from thinking that we are part of biodiversity, and to actually biodiversity is a part of humanity, and we have to take care of it as we take care of ourselves. So I think that the main switch that we will have in 10 years' time, and that will have a lot of consequences in the way we behave, in the way we create industry, in the way we do business, in all those ways. Like putting biodiversity actually as a part of us, not as something outside.
Returning to our original relationship with nature and our surroundings.
Yes.
Thank you. Patrik, penultimate.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think in terms of different goals, and targets on the global level and also on European level, on national levels, we have a picture where we want to be in 2030. But there is just a small dimension that, it's not so small, but it's an additional dimension that hasn't been mentioned today, and I think will play a big role in the next 10 years, and it's the digital component, the digitalization of everything that we are speaking about.
Very, very interesting.
Very good.
Indeed.
Closing thoughts from you, Maria.
Well, allow me to speak as a co-legislator. Well, we have the instruments that we can support the bio-based industries. I would like to start with ETS. Maybe we could relate ETS with bio-based waste management, especially in agriculture, because as you know, maybe the non-ETS sector will be included in the evolution of our next ETS. And of course, we have, ETS is the emission trade system, excuse me for the jargon. And of course, we have taxonomy, and I cannot imagine that the taxonomy list for sustainable finance will include nuclear energy and will not include bio-based industries. Thank you.
Well, we will look forward to the details, which will be forthcoming in the weeks and months to come. So that brings us to the end of the session. I think we probably don't have a concrete answer on how we revolutionize the European market. I think what I take away from this is that there's enormous progress. And again, perhaps a level of progress, a scale of progress that hasn't been fully appreciated up until now, and that there is significant work to be done on the communications side. On the positive notes, we have the policy leadership largely in place. We have financing, which is now readily available, whether it's at EU level or through private markets and investors looking to support bio-based ventures, and we have the technology maturity. So the solutions are there. We clearly need to work more on infrastructure. There's a lot of knowledge and maybe instruments or programs at the consumer level that need to be put in place to complement this, and also a rethinking of value and the economic sustainability for primary producers and other stakeholders around the bio-based systems of the future. But I think we end on a positive note, and an optimistic one. So with that, I'd like you to join me in thanking our panelists for their contributions, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's discussion.